Jeff Beal. So I was trying to think this morning when it was that I first knew your name, that I first heard about you. And I'm pretty sure it must have been after I saw Pollock, that beautiful film with Ed Harris and the amazing score. And then it seemed like you were everywhere. It seemed like every other thing I saw, you had composed, and always inventive and tasteful and super musically intelligent music. And then came House of Cards, and House of Cards is just, for me, a revelation. It's like just a complete sea change in the way you score that kind of show, or even a show. And I posted on Facebook this post where I had talked about the intro, and I said, listen to what he's done with the snare drum here. And it was like you hit it on here, you hit it here, you hit it here, but then the third time it was only tom. Something it was just subtle. And I made this point that this is a real composer, right? That it's not loops. It's like every note and every gesture has its own arc. And your son, Henry Beal, who at the time was maybe 18 or something.
Yeah, said, or maybe, yeah, probably around that age, yeah.
Yeah, right. So he was following me on Facebook, and he said, hey, I'm Jeff's son. And by the way, that's me playing bass on the opening theme. And I'll tell my dad he liked it. And I wrote to him, I said, what? And I think that's the first time that we were actually introduced, right? That's the first time I remember you and I connecting.
No, absolutely. And the only other memory I have before that is my wife, Joan, had become friends with Gila, and we had seen a reading you had done of your musical.
Paradise Lost. Yeah.
Yeah, but I didn't really know you. I knew of you, but then, after you had moved away and, your music became so well known, that I started to follow your choral music, and I thought, man, this guy is it was a revelation to me hearing what you were doing with the human voice, and I just became a fan from afar. So this chance to reconnect with you and really face to face see you was just such a treat.
Yeah, and then funny, we've become, I'd say over the past 3 years or so, we've become really good friends, and spent a lot of time together. And it's just funny how we were having sort of these parallel paths out there in the world, listening to each other's music, and then found each other. So I was thinking about, all right, so what do I want to talk to Jeff about? And if you're okay with it, where I want to start with is just, how the hell do you do it? And what I mean by that is, so in my world, and I know you're writing a lot of concert music too now, the process of composing a piece of music it's totally different than writing for film or television. At least it seems to me from the outside. And I definitely want to talk about your concert music too, but starting with the film and television work, what does it look like for you? Like literally from the very beginning of the project to how it unfolds.
Yeah, I think the same answer is true kind of in my process in concert music, because, my sort of gateway drug into music making was through jazz. I took up the trumpet in grade school, and I was fascinated. I had a piano in the house. I started to tinker around, but I remember around middle school when I started to improvise on the trumpet, I got super, super excited, and just like the gateway was open. And the more I improvised, the more fun I had. And I saw this connection to this kinetic type of creativity that I had no other outlet for. It was like, a gift, really. We all have those moments of revelation in our life, when epiphany, when we see maybe something we have inside ourselves that needs to be expressed. And so for me, really, composing was an outgrowth of improvising first, because I even to this day, as much as the training and the analysis and all that, knowledge kind of enters in, I feel like I'm very much a process person. There's improvisation is always a big part of my process. And so, I'm not one of these guys that like sings in the shower and like, there's the melody. For me, it's like you find it as you're doing it. And a lot of the most interesting things I find when I'm working happen in the moment of just creating, whether that's noodling on the piano or just whatever, right? I mean, there's a certain amount of daydreaming in terms of concept and stuff. The thing I love about, to be more specific about the film music thing, is I realize I am a storyteller, whether it's a concert piece or a film score. I love telling stories. And for me, what makes being a composer a meaningful pursuit is that somehow everything I feel about music, the music that I love, your music, concert music that I love, film music that I love, I feel like the music that speaks to me, and I think what really defines great music is that somehow it tells a story. It doesn't mean that always you have to know what that story is, but this is something I feel like we do in our brains. Our brains create a story when we hear a piece of music, even if there's no visuals associated with it. So that's part one. Part two is, I think because of the jazz musician, I came up playing this music, and if you play jazz, it's a complete kinetic experience. Like you play an idea, somebody else plays an idea, it spurs you on. So it's this completely collective experience. And I realized very early on in writing film scores, like Pollock's a great example, Monk's another one, is I really started to get into what actors were doing and really following what they were doing and finding ways to frame that information, whether it was the way the rhythm of their dialogue, the way they said stuff, and then in very strange ways find musical solutions. Sometimes they were conscious, sometimes they're conscious decisions, like maybe the bass line in the House of Cards theme. That's kind of a conscious decision to be stubborn and, you know, a bullhorn like Kevin Spacey's character, Frank Underwood. Yeah. You know, I remember I was giving a class just a couple days ago. I was talking about the very first ever cue I wrote for Monk, Tony Shalhoub's show, this great show about this brilliant detective with OCD. And the first scene, he hears about a murder and he runs to get it. But the whole time he's at the crime scene, he's worrying that he left the gas on with the stove, and he can focus on that. And I just thought the way in which the psychology, the way in his mind worked, led me to something, and that created me to write this sort of sophisticated thing in which there were these sly modulations in the way that somebody that's maybe brilliant can sort of like change subjects suddenly. Huh. You know, there's all sorts of little metaphors that you discover as you're working through. But I guess bottom line, I just love telling stories. You know, I love being challenged, and I feel like part of the reason I've been incredibly lucky, but I think part of the reason, I think it's easier to be prolific as a film composer because you have all this constant outside stimuli coming at you. Every film's a new world, and it's a chance to reinvent yourself and find a new musical language and try to tell stories.
That's amazing. So first, I love this idea that you're bouncing off actors in a way, or even dancing with actors. I'm a big film nerd too. And television these days, especially. This is like the golden age of television, I find.
Absolutely.
Right. And I'm always stunned at how much an actor can bring to. I have like 50 or 60 screenplays here. I love reading scripts the way I would a score.
Wow, that's hard to do. I mean, a screenplay, you really are a film geek if you can sit down and read screenplays.
Right. Well, that's what's interesting is on the page, it's nothing, right? It's nothing. And then you see it come to life, and it's what an actor chooses to do. And it's all the moments in between the dialogue and always what they're doing with their eyes. And I love the idea that you can watch something and then be like, it makes the music that you're going to write hyper specific to that, right? It's not like we're going to do a show about Washington, D.C. So let's see, what does Washington, D.C. sound like? Before you read a script, what you're saying is you actually get the footage and you're watching it and bouncing off the actual image the way the audience is as well.
Yeah, I mean, I try to put myself in the viewpoint of a viewer. Like, I'm watching the show. How does that affect me? In the case of House of Cards, it was interesting because actually a lot of the first things I wrote, the scripts, the themes were really based on 4 scripts, and David Fincher wanted me to write some sketches before he started shooting, which was another great experiment. I do that sometimes, but yeah, really, it's on the page. But actually, Bill Williman, the brilliant writer and creator of the version of House of Cards, he said something about screenwriting, which I loved. He said, really, all I'm doing in my script is creating a space for the performance to happen. And I love that. I mean, and it's really true. I mean, you look at the great performances, the great scenes, 90% of what makes it special is not simply the words that are being said, although good script is, of course, essential, but it's this nonverbal way in which we communicate, which I think that's why music is such a powerful medium. Music plays into all those things that transcend the more sort of, simple distillations of what's being said, and they get to the subtones, the undertext, what's lying beneath. Sometimes, I remember my first professor at Eastman, Ray Wright, one of my first mentors, he loved to talk about this, and I think about this a lot. A lot of times a good film score is simply it's not telling you what you're seeing because you're already seeing that. It's telling you what you're not seeing, or it's telling you something about your seeing that maybe you didn't think about. Pollock was a great gift for a film composer, because we had some great scenes in that movie where, Ed Harris just, man, he threw himself into that role, Eric, and
Yeah.
just, man, those painting scenes are still one of my favorite movies about an artist ever. And they're like,
perfectly scored. I don't mean to interrupt, but the music was perfect for. Also, I mean, were you taking inspiration not only from his performance, but also literally the style of painting? The splatter paint and.
Absolutely, and it's funny because by the time I spoke to Ed about the movie, he had some pretty strong thoughts about the thought process going on there, and he felt like a lot of people felt that Pollock was simply a random, and he said, as Pollock said himself, "I deny the accident." And when you look at one of his canvases, yeah, of course there are these kinetic things, but there's a lot of design going on. So I know Ed wanted this sense of structure in the music that also had this sort of sense of great manic abandon. So like, how do you combine those two things? It's fascinating,
Yeah, I mean, it's such a gift. And do you find that if, without calling out names, but then is the quality of the music that comes out of you dependent on how good the script is or how good the actors are? Do you know what I mean? Because I've also seen you write amazing scores for films that that weren't amazing. So
yes,
yeah,
several, and also documentaries, which might be amazing films, but they don't have the footage and the scripting. Where
Exactly.
So a lot of times the documentary is a great example too. Like I often tell young composers, great to get a great movie, a great series like House of Cards, but you really earn your stripes on things that aren't so good. And that's actually a great opportunity, because you can also see how a great music can actually elevate material that isn't quite all there. This is something we do all the time, even in House of Cards. We would have moments where the filmmakers, the producers would call me and say, we got this scene, it's not quite working, here's what we need you to do. There was a great example in the very beginning of the last season where Claire Underwood walks through the White House, and there's this whole gag about this bird that's buried in the wall, and it's tapping, and it was this great suspense sequence, but it just wasn't landing, and they said, we really need help with this. And so, so it's just the case where, film is an audio visual medium, and so much time and resources and attention gets put on what you're seeing. And unfortunately, sometimes the sound world gets forgotten. But I think what really makes a great filmmaker is they understand how to use film, how to use sound. Like, David Fincher's a great example. M. Night Shyamalan's a great example. Signs is a great movie. There's been some great recent movies where, I think you think about your favorite movies where the music is memorable and used. That's not just because a great score was written. That's also because a director who understood the power of music and let room for it to happen, be in there.
Yeah, I don't know if you've seen 1917, the
yes,
right, the Thomas Newman score, which I loved. And there's that scene towards the end of the film, right, where it's the nighttime and they're in the fire, and it's, you could just see it. It must have said in the script, okay, Thomas Newman, go, right? Because he basically just gave him 4 minutes of just open it up, just do what needs to be done here. And that also seems to me like an incredibly trusting filmmaker, right? That says at the very end of this process, I'm going to leave, I'm going to do all of this, and then just know that this person that I've hired to do the score is going to bring this thing to life. So is there part of your process when you're working with the director where you're engendering that kind of trust from the beginning, or trying to find common ground?
Absolutely. And it's fun to work with people multiple times, because then you develop a shorthand and that, but I feel like building trust is the first job you have to do with the filmmaker. And they're terrified. Listen, this music is the one thing they can't really control. They can't really speak to. It's hard for us to speak to. And they're handing over their film, this incredibly important part of their film, to you. And it's your job to translate their image and take their direction. So I often feel like, it's great to give a good first meeting, but I feel like the trust is really wind in the second or third meeting, when you get that feedback and something isn't landing the way they want it to. You try to distill what they're saying, you go back and try to rework it and come back, and then they say, aha, or the third or fourth time, or however many takes. Yeah. But it's a process, and I think that's part of what, listen, when I was younger, it was harder to do, and But you know, as an artist, being willing to accept input from somebody, and again, it's not about whether or not it's a good piece of music. Is does it tell the story in the way that the director envisions? And that's sometimes a very mysterious thing, you know, to define. But it does keep you on your toes creatively, I find, for sure. You know, and it's like dating. You know, you never know. Like I'm finishing up a second project with Oliver Stone. You know, it's one of my absolute heroes.
Yeah, mine
it's
too.
a documentary on JFK. It's a fascinating 4-hour piece. And I remember the first time I worked with him, I was kind of terrified. And it's like, we just hit it off, you know, and he's got.
Was it on the Castro documentary that you first worked on?
No, it was Putin.
Oh, the Putin, exactly. That's what it was.
Interviews, yeah, which is very controversial but fascinating piece as well. And I'm a big fan of his other piece, The Untold History of the United States. I think it's the name of the series on Showtime. But, you know, he's a real just intellectual. But I found with Oliver, when we sat in the room and he had and he wanted to discuss stuff, it always went back to story. And that was great. That's why we hit it off, because that's how I think of music too. Like, we talk about a piece of music and he said, I don't think it's working. And we discussed, and I said, well, I think this is maybe what the story should be. And it was, eyes would just light up, and we'd start to go, again, we're not talking about music really, we're talking about story. And it's my job, you know, it's any composer's job to hopefully, you know, take the direction, whether it's emotional or just a set of adverbs, and filter that through your musical voice. All you have is your own perspective, your own views, and you have to. I'm sure you feel that way when you write a piece of concert music. You know, it's like the only person you can really please is yourself, right? So you have to be happy. I don't know what your process is. How do you arrive at some of these amazing pieces you've done? I remember so well that falling, I rise, you fall.
Yeah, you rise, I fall. Yeah.
The Sacred Veils, like, oh, just what a powerful piece. But the way you built in these real powerful metaphors of shapes into the text, and it was just like, wow. I just remember that was like a spontaneous standing ovation when you premiered that movement, and it was just like, we were all just like, man, you hit it out of the park. So
well, thank you.
You know, where does that come from, right? How do you do that?
Well, it's funny because I've often thought of myself as for lack of better words, like a film composer, but for text, right? That the text is the film, and in that the poetry is it's the film. And I'm servicing the poetry with the music. Do you know what I mean? And that somehow then always my way in to the musical ideas are in the text themselves. Either it's very literally painting a textual idea with music, or if there's a more conceptual idea about the whole thing. So it's really interesting to hear that in many ways the processes are the same. The one that I find fascinating that you do is that in terms of film or television, the boxes are so defined, right? In terms of your restrictions, that you'll have a cue that is, let's say, 1 minute and 31 seconds, period, right? That's not changing. Yeah. It's not like I need 30 more seconds to develop this idea, or I need to no, this is literally what you have to work with, right? And so do you find that kind of constraint liberating? Do you know what I mean? Like, does it allow you to really open up in a way that you couldn't?
I think everybody, I mean, for me, it gives you a boundary in which to funnel what you're doing. So that is a gift in the sense that you learn how to exist in different spaces of time. And it's funny you mentioned about a minute 30, because that's very much like almost like the average length, I think, of a cue, and maybe in a film.
Is it really?
In the TV show, maybe it's a little shorter. But you know, this whole idea of existing in time and creating the irony of that is within that minute and 30 seconds, often your job will be to speed up the sense of time passing, or to slow it down. Huh. And one of the tricks you learn is when suppose you want to slow it down and really linger in this minute and a half, even though it's not really that long of a time frame, you start to learn how to create a little poem, a little miniature that has enough space in it so that it feels like it could even go on even longer if it wanted to. You know what I mean? So that's interesting. I do know from my own experience Often writing shorter cues is a lot harder than writing longer ones because you have to do all the same work, but in a much shorter time frame, you know? So I feel like each good cue should have a beginning, a middle, and an end, basically. It should be a coherent thought, a coherent piece of music. So when you have a little more time to play with, those sort of musical considerations sometimes become a little more easier to execute because you've got a bigger canvas to paint on.
Yeah, but also the time frames that you work in, where it's like, here's the cue, and here's where it has to be not only written but produced and recorded, is sometimes just it's like if you just started and put down the very first idea you had and got it up and recorded it, that's about as much time you have, right? So do you find also part of my process is that I just agonize. I agonize and agonize. I think there's a quote by Balzac, the author, who said that it's Flaubert. He said that I spent the morning putting in a comma and the afternoon taking it back out.
Yeah.
Right. And
yeah.
that really describes my general writing process. But that's because I usually have months and months and months to make something. And whenever I'm asked, how long does it take me to write a piece? I say, as much time as I have, right? If it's a year from now that the commission is due, it will be done 10 seconds before the year is over. So for you, knowing that, like, sometimes you get something that's like, okay, I got 2 hours to do this. That's it. Is it, do you agonize? Do you sweat over it? Do you spend weeks later thinking, oh God, if I had it, or are you the kind of composer where it's just, boom, that's the best idea I've got right now. I put it down, I'm going to war with it, and that's it. Move on.
I think, I remember when I did my first few jazz records as a trumpet player, being so stressed out about the solos on my solo records, which are of course improvised, and they're in the moment, and they're going to have warts. And in a club, I was fine with that, but on a recording, it was like, oh my God, Huh. And I guess I've become forgiving of myself because I have learned over these years of having to generate and trust and just say, okay, it's done, onward, next. I have become kinder to myself, and I've actually become to enjoy the little imperfections or the little things that may, you know what I mean? I think there's a way in which I've gotten better and better at knowing what to spend time on and knowing what not to spend time on. Of course, you want it to be as great as it can be. I think the thing that I think I work smarter than I did when I was younger. I think there was a lot more of that angst earlier in terms of a film composer's process. I think now, and again, this plays into the improviser in me, because again, a lot of my best ideas just come fast anyways. It doesn't really matter. I'm actually good friends with Mark Isham, another great jazz trumpet player, really great friend, amazing mentor. He's actually the guy that recommended me to Ed Harris for Pollock many years ago. Just a wonderful man. And I remember he's very similar. I remember I think he got his first Academy Award nomination for an amazing score to River Runs Through It.
Oh, I love
for a beautiful film, beautiful score. I mean, it's just one of his finest. That was a replacement score. He wrote it and recorded in 3 weeks.
No way.
And he was just kind of telling me, we're both jazz trumpet players. You're just saying, like, I've just learned over the years not to judge. And he's saying this about himself. You might not have said this might not be your model. He said, yeah, I've just learned not to judge how much time I spend on something as to assigning a value to it for myself. And I understand that. I mean, it sometimes becomes a frustration with me. Some of the things that have come the easiest were just like they fell out of my brain, I mean, House of Cards theme, that was a sketch. That was like one of 2 sketches I wrote on a day for Fincher, like, oh, that one's pretty cool. Okay, well, let me write another one. That was it. It was done, But I thought about what you said too, because I did read Walter Isaacson's wonderful biography on Leonardo da Vinci a couple years ago. And I loved it because it was a deep dive into his process, which was completely different. It's more like what yours is. And he was such a scientist. He was so much he was studying anatomy and all these things about the body. And his painting is, his output was certainly not as prolific as Picasso or Matisse or any of these people, but his greatest paintings are just off the charts great.
Yeah.
And he would tinker and tinker and tinker and never finish things. He would get worse. He would not even be 5 before. He would just simply not deliver a commission. And And for me, someone who's always saying like, okay, it's done, let's ship it. Like in the case of Monk, I'd get these episodes and I'd write them in a few days and they'd be on the air. And then by the end of the week, I mean, it's no time, writing a newspaper column, and that's a certain flow you get into, which I realized for me artistically, that fit my gifts. I mean, for me, if I get on a film sometimes when there's too much time, too much navel gazing, and people want to go around and around, and this is different than your process because this are other people coming in sometimes and trying to, that can become harder for me than, so in a way I think I thrived, especially, and I've done a lot of movies, but I did a lot of series, that kind of rhythm creatively has been helpful or works for me. I do enjoy, now in the concert music years and giving myself, I do enjoy when I have a commission to have more time to just think about it and ponder. A lot of times when I get a commission, I mean, I always think, you can speed up working, but you can't speed up thinking. And this is true of a film work or a concert piece. And I do feel that time in which it's just kind of rolling around in your head, marinating. I love that time when I haven't started writing. Again, it's not like the melodies start to come, but just, I love dreaming about what the piece is going to be in my imagination and thinking about it. I remember when I did Salvage Men, which was such a gift to write for you and Grant. This was kind of a really transformative experience because, I had been diagnosed with MS several years before. And I realized at that point, boy, I've spent my whole life, I was so happy telling other people's stories. And I did some concert music earlier on in my career, but I just realized I got to get back to this. And my wife, Joan, who's amazing, said, you got to write for the LA Master Chorale, you got to write for voices. And I realized that to write a piece about what I was going through in terms of dealing with the new normal of living with MS and the anger and the suffering and the pain and associated with living with a chronic illness was something I wanted to process through a musical creation. And that was a really fascinating process because it went a lot slower. I found some text I loved. But it was a much more of an experiment. I was learning, I had really never written an a cappella choral piece before. So this is like, I think I can do this, let's see what this is. And I'll never forget, Joan and I were in London when we were with you in some rehearsal studio, and your singers, who are just amazing sight readers, these people just can do it. Ridiculous. You read the first movement, and Joan and I just started weeping. It was like, oh my God, it was so moving. And I don't know, I think it was probably because it was definitely because it was personal. It was a personal piece, but it was also something I had not had the pleasure of doing a lot in my day job, was just writing for the human voice. And this is something I loved in your music. I remember when I was the night I was diagnosed, it was terrifying. We came home with this news. I was maybe 44 years old. And it's like, man, my son was just a young teenager, and I was in the middle of my career. And it's like, what are we going to do? And I was terrified. I remember instinctually, I already had your record. Was it Cloudburst, or the first kind of big record? Was that Cloudburst?
Yeah.
Yeah. And I love that recording, and I just put it on and just had a little moment of meditation and prayer that night, listening to that music, Eric. And that's what inspired me to want to write this piece and reconnect. But your music was such a gift to me in this really terrifying time. And I realized the power of choral music, the power of it to affect us in a way which I don't think any other music really gets to that place that singing does.
So, the Salvage Men, by the way, for people who are listening to this and don't know this piece, you've got to check it out. And I had the huge honor of doing the UK premiere. Grant did the premiere here in Los Angeles. And I think what stunned me most about that piece is that being your first a cappella choral piece, that just kills me, because it's like, been doing this my whole life. Here's how that goes. It reminds me very much of Debussy and Ravel. They only both wrote one a cappella set of pieces. That's it. It's like, that's how you do that. Wow. Also, then one string quartet, right? Okay. By the way, there's how you write it.
You were going to say string quartets when you said that, because they both wrote brilliant string quartets. Yeah.
Yeah, but just one, right? They're like, there you go. That's how you do that. But the thing that oftentimes I think choral composers miss, even people who've been doing it a long time, is this dedication to the text. That oftentimes they're thinking about just the sound world of what voices can do. But really, for me, the thing that separates singing and choral music from all the other musical animals is that you illuminate the poetry. You bring this poetry to life. You give it the words beneath the words, just like you were saying with actors and filmmaking. And Salvage Men is so deep that way. It's beautiful, interesting poetry. It's and then you found these musical colors in it. And I wanted to ask you that, so that all of this came around that time that you had the diagnosis. Did you find yourself, was it cathartic to build it? Was it reflective of what it was? Was the poetry itself like, yeah, that expresses what I'm feeling right now? Or was it a vehicle? How was it for you?
All of the above. I remember, I think instinctually I felt like there was some sort of personal catharsis I needed to work through to process what I was going through. And of course, I mean, everybody has their own version of therapy. I feel lucky because I'm sure I could be in therapy, but I'm not. But I feel like every day I sit down and write music, that's my therapy, because I'm confronting my stuff. But I do remember in the composing of it, I remember when I got to the end, I had this huge sense of relief, like, oh, I got that out, you know? And that was part one. Part two, I think, was just in the sharing of it and seeing other people respond to it who had listen, what happened to me is not unique. Nobody escapes life, whether it's COVID or being killed by a cop or getting cancer. I mean, the human journey is baked into that experience. It's suffering. And so I just wanted to confront my version of that. But one of the nice things about the piece is in the sharing of it, it's spoken to a lot of other people dealing with grief or suffering or just whatever. I don't think it was simply about, it was also about hope. I think it was also about an attitude towards suffering. And this wonderful poet that I found, whose poetry really forms the bulk of the work, Kay Ryan, was recommended to me by a wonderful author friend, Mark Salzman, whose work I love. And he said, you should check out Kay's stuff.
I know Mark Salzman.
Yeah, he wrote The Soloist, the book about the cellos.
Yeah.
And he wrote, he's written some great books. He's not very prolific, but he's brilliant. He's married. I met him he's married to Jessica Yu, who is a filmmaker who I've done a lot of films with, and Mark's her husband. Joan had read his books even before we started working together. But Kay's poetry had this wonderful sense of acceptance of things the way they are, but the sense of lightness about embracing the world and embracing the suffering that we all go through, that I felt like that was the right tone I wanted to take with this piece. Was like, and I know the last movement of the piece, which is a poem that I wasn't even sure I was going to set, but I realized I had to set it, was Salvage, which is sort of this beautiful meditation on what do you do when the worst thing possible has happened. You know, what do you do? You know, this is not a stretch for people living right now to see what's happening in the world, the kind of disruption that's happened economically, physically, health-wise, but we don't have a choice on those things. All we can choose to is how we respond to it. Yeah. And Kay's poem is beautiful. You know, the worst has happened, the destruction has happened. It's all just rubble. And then she says the salvage men come in and they gather and they just sort of do their thing. And it was so beautiful. And she had this sort of poetic alliterations to it, almost like being a salvage things, as if it's a table and it's a communion, or it's just like, but it was just sort of just simple, but also very acknowledging in the reality of just how horrible the destruction could be. I remember when she wrote the poem, she actually kept it on her desk and submit it, because she wrote it before 9/11 happened. And if you read it just after, it's very easy to read the poem and think she wrote it about 9/11. She withheld it and didn't publish it till many years later. It's a beautiful poem. I remember when I met with Kay to set her words, because I wanted to get her blessing, and we sat down, and she was from Northern California, really cool lady. And she lived in Northern California. I won't say the city because she's very private, but she sat down, and her first line was, she goes, well, my poetry is not lyrics. And I thought, like, okay, that's a great opening volley. I was like, okay, Miss Ryan, I get it, man. Okay. And I totally got what she meant. It's like, it's done on the page.
Yeah.
It's complete. And I said, cool. And she did say, so I thought, well, this is going to be a no. I was like, maybe she, but then she started to say, well, she started to talk about some people that had done some interesting things with their poetry, where I got encouragement. It's like, okay. And I had written her about what the piece was going to be about. And she was responsive to that. So she gave me her blessing. But, we had these premieres in London and Los Angeles, and I never heard from her really about it. I think I might've said a recording, but she was just she was very, very removed from the piece. And a mutual friend of ours, Stephen Altop, has done the piece a couple times in Chicago with the Apollo Chorus. And the second time we did it, we were able to bring Kay out and be a speaker at the Poetry Foundation in Chicago, which had co-hosted her at this beautiful event. She was actually really there for the Poetry Foundation. And as part of her appearance, we performed several movements with a scaled down version of the Apollo Chorus, which is, I think, about 100 people. I mean, it's amazing. They did this incredibly complex piece with really a volunteer choir of 100 people. And I remember I was sitting next to Kay. Like, I mean, she never even said, I like the piece. I mean, I know she wouldn't have come if she didn't kind of think it was okay. But, I'm glad. So I'm like, oh my God, like I'm sitting next to the poet, And I remember after we did it, she kind of looked over and she goes, I really enjoyed that. And we had 2 performances. I got to sit with her again, and we really connected. And I think the thing that I loved about that time with her was that even for her, she realized that the musical setting of her words was able to sort of transmit, like you're saying, the meaning, the soul of the words. They were able to communicate them in a way that was very meaningful, that didn't completely destroy. And I was very much about that, because I realized I had this Pulitzer Prize winning, poetry to deal with. I wanted to be very respectful of that text. So that was a happy moment. But I think you're right. I think the power of choral music is this idea of story that's embedded in the words, and this idea that our bodies, the most basic instrument, is singing, making this sound from our bodies. But the text is what it's about. It's the reason for being. But it's funny, because I know this is sort of late in your career, but I love some of the pieces you did in London, which were simple. You did an Alleluia, and you did a couple other.
Yeah. And
those are, I guess, how did you approach those when you said, I'm just going to create a musical structure, but it's just going to be a single word?
Yeah, it's a really interesting thing. So I was just thinking about when you were saying that about talking about scoring film and slowing down time or speeding up time, that you have this. And I remember early on when I was playing with close harmonies and dissonances, but especially, let's say you've got a C major chord with the added fourth, right? So you've got the suspension and the resolution in the same chord, right? So you've got that F and that E right there, just buzzing. And to my ears, it always felt like you have the suspension and the resolution happening at the same time. And so that you have a chord that desperately wants to resolve and hasn't resolved. And I always felt like it felt then that we were traveling forward at the speed of light and standing still at the same time. And it created this stasis. And I think in London, for whatever, maybe it was just my age, or maybe it was living in the labyrinth of London. I think by the time I finally moved, I'd lost my mind a little bit, just from the narrow streets. I mean, it really does feel like a rat's maze, especially a kid from Nevada who's just used to these big open skies, just spending the days doing this, that I felt myself just meditating on a word. So instead of thinking, usually I think of poetry as the long arc, right? And the prosody, that there's a meaning that can only happen if you take a sentence and basically say it in real time. Even if it's slowed down, it's here's the thought, right? But somewhere along the way, I thought, no, what if you just take a single word or a moment and then just meditate on it? And maybe even almost like a mantra, that you meditate it so long that it stops having its original meaning, and it just starts buzzing and bubbling with the sound of the word or the meaning underneath the word. Yeah, I mean, it sounds so artistic when I'm doing it, but it's really incredibly intuitive.
That's fascinating, though, because even in that context, even though you were still meditating on that one idea, right? That was driving the whole thing forward.
That's it. Yeah, you pick out an idea, and then, I mean, do you find this in your own music that you have an idea that I call them golden bricks, right? It's like it's an idea that is full of the rest of the piece in it, and it's
Yeah.
more than just a musical motive. You know, it's more than just da 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 dum. Although I'm not saying that's not a great motive, and who knows why Beethoven wrote it. But what I'm saying is, it's not just four notes that then add up to make another piece. Embedded in it is also the emotional architecture of the rest of the piece, right? There's a deep emotional soul to it that is extra musical. Do you find that, like, when you're writing, that, yep, that's a moment, and then that's going to become the skeleton of the rest of the thing? Do you work that way?
I do, and I've thought about it a lot because I'm a you know, you grew up in Nevada in a beautiful place, and I'm right here in Northern California, a very natural environment. I love nature. You know, Frank Lloyd Wright said, "I put a capital N on nature, and that's my church." And I understand what he was saying, because I feel I get a lot of energy, and I drink in a lot of beauty when I'm in nature. I see all the little variations it has, and I think a lot of times music is like that. It's like the acorn becomes the oak, you know, the conch shell becomes the galaxy. Like it plays into all the things about physics and the way the world is constructed, that I think part of what makes music so so beautiful to our brains is that in some way it rhymes with everything else that makes the world tick, which is this sort of fractal kind of geometry. You know, fractals are baked into everything in the world. It's the way leaves, you know, leaves things, the way the leaves branch out. And a fractal, by definition, is a small shape, or the way a coastline kind of zigzags its way. The way a small variation can be mimicked and be expanded in many times over. So I think a good piece of music often has those little tiny cells of an idea. And certainly, selfishly, when we're composing, it's always, yeah, what is that golden brick? What is that kernel that's gonna inform what the rest of the piece is? And part of the mystery of it, really, and the joy of it is at a certain point, the piece is going to tell us what it. I feel like the piece is going to tell me what it is.
Yeah.
And often I'm surprised, you know. I remember when I was doing Sunrise, for example, you know, the film score for the LA Master Chorale that we premiered in January. Like, I had no idea what I was going to write when I composed that, and you know, the piece, at a certain point, the film was telling me something, but the story was telling me something, and it took me in places I did not expect to go. And that was a fun process, because it was kind of like halfway in between the way a concert composer thinks and the way a film composer thinks. I wasn't simply scoring the movie. I was really allowing the architecture of what I thought was happening in the music to drive it forward. But then there was some way in which what was happening in the music was also working with the story and sort of creating this dance with the movie. So that was a fascinating project. I'm actually got a commission to do a new one for.
Do you really?
Yeah, I'm going to do Cabinet of Dr. Caligari for this wonderful German youth honor, like, great jazz band and 10 singers, and I'm really excited about that, because I really feel like silent movies are kind of cool because they're out of our time, and they're like these sort of you can see them more as metaphors and black and white, and just they're like these canvases, and you can kind of paint a new picture on it. And I guess maybe it's my fascination with visual storytelling. I just love the idea of some sort of visual component being part of. I think visually when I'm writing, you know.
Yeah, I do too.
I'm not right. Yeah, isn't it weird? I mean, but you start to visualize a place or a house or I'm sitting here. My dad's old drafting table is propping up my computer right now, and I used to sit at his drafting table and draw little houses. And my sister found this whole big plane I had done with my dad's help. And you know, that idea of an architect, I think, is something if I wasn't a composer, I think an architect would have been maybe the other profession I would have wanted to pursue. I feel like architects get to do that. They get to sort of create something out of nothing.
Yeah,
and create an environment. And a piece of music is like a house. It's like a house maybe you haven't been into, but you want to live in. And so what are the rooms like? And what happens if I go down this hallway? And all that kind of fun
I
stuff.
couldn't agree more. Every time I read, I'm also endlessly fascinated by architecture, and every time I read a biography about, say, Frank Lloyd Wright or Louis Kahn, and hear
Yeah.
about the process of architecture, then it's exact same thing that we do. At least it's my process almost completely. You've got these materials, you've got this space. How does it relate to the other things around it? What is it saying? How do people move through it? What is the effect that it has on people inside the space itself? Yeah, I think, and I spend.
You know Ellen Reed at all by any chance?
No.
She's good. She's a good
Oh,
friend.
Ellen Reed, the composer.
Yeah. She's done these. So she's doing a lot. And I'm sure will continue. She's done a lot of stuff, but one of the things she's done, which I really love, I've seen one of them, but she designs these sort of installations, which are sound, kind of combination of architecture and sound. You know, I've never done any of these. I've done them different type. Well, because I think when I think about a space and a place, I think the most exciting one I ever did, and this is so bittersweet, but you think about dumb luck, but around this time last year, I was on the mall in Washington, D.C., right, with about 500,000 people, and these guys from 59 Productions who are just so creative, and I know you've worked with them before on Deep Field. I guess that was why I was thinking, because of the visual component of some of your works, but you know, we created this homage to the 50th anniversary of the moon landing, and we lit up the Washington Monument. They lit up the Washington Monument with the rocket, and these beautiful giant screens on either side of it. And it was, talk about a happening, an artistic happening where music, story, place, all kind of
Unbelievable.
converged. And it was such a beautiful moment. I remember the last show, or the show on Saturday night, was literally timed so that the moment, you know, Neil Armstrong said those words was 50 years to the date that he said them, you know? And wow, to be on the mall with Washington, D.C., with all those people in the midst of this divisive political environment we're in, all having something to celebrate together was, wow. I mean, I felt so lucky to be a part of something like that. I think that's part of the fun of what we do, is that we're in our little rooms. Like, I'm so glad we're friends, and but you know, most composers, we don't run into each other that much, because we're all in our little dark rooms doing our thing, you know. But for me, I don't know how you feel, but it's like part of the struggle, and part of the reason I'm so thrilled you did this new virtual choir is that, you know, music, it's one thing when you write it, but then when you get it, when you put it up and you finally hear it sung, right? You still get a little bit of, you get surprised by something you wrote, or just an emotional hit from that. It must still be.
Oh yeah, God, yeah. I mean, you must be the same way, right? Where you're like, although I think early on, I think about when the pieces that I first wrote, and early on, there was a kind of wonder, almost like a child. I always think of Tinker Toys, right? You build the thing, and then you turn the machine on, and oh my God, it works. I made a thing that works, right? Even irrespective of music or beauty or something, it's a machine that when you do all the things, then it actually makes it. And now, I guess, with something like Sing Gently, it must be my age, where I'm genuinely moved by the actual people making it. I'm endlessly humbled by this idea that people, you know, have a score, and then they learn it, they work on it, and then they take it into themselves, and then they bring it to life. You know, they're not just pistons on a machine anymore. Yeah. They're the reason for this thing. And so that's why I say my age, because it's made me super weepy. Like now, these days, I can't really get through anything without just being like,
I think we're all feeling a little weepy these days, Eric. It's okay.
Yeah. Although I have to admit, I was weepy before COVID. It's just, I'm just getting to that place now where, even, you know, just seeing beautiful faces singing and making music, it's emotionally overwhelming to me. And so now what I do, I find when I'm composing, and I wonder if you do this too, I'm literally writing for the people I know. So like, I can see the faces of the people in my choir as I'm writing the alto line. I know, I know who these people are, even if they're not the final people to sing it. You know, I just have like the sense of people, and I know you, which is extraordinary. You've got a huge living room in your house, and you basically turn it into your recording studio. And so you can get a decent sized orchestra in there. And I'm assuming you must hire basically the same set of players.
Yeah, it's a core group. No, it's not unlike your London singers, you know, who's like that's a band you've had, you know, that's your repertory group. I love that idea of writing for repertory groups. I mean, the people, again, you know, when I wrote for the LA Master Chorale, I love writing for a soloist, you know, I always write to the person. I think it's I selfishly, I kind of borrow from that. I think if it's a concerto or a solo piece, sometimes I try to get inside the psychology of maybe the person I'm writing for, or you know. But I agree, and that's been one of the things that I've realized, and I'm sure we've all missed that, you know, in the shutdown. Just that experience of making music. I mean, so a lot of the things that brought me joy about music had not to do with this part of it. It was the going out, seeing it realized, and appreciating the humanity and the gifts of people coming together and bringing it to life. And yeah, I can certainly see how, you know, Sing Gently is a great, imagine what an outlet that is to all these people who want to participate in something. I mean, I can't wait for the unveiling. It'll be just, you know, a chance to celebrate, you know, people together, people making something really beautiful.
Thanks, Jeff. Yeah, I think it's going to be really nice, and it's good to talk to you, man. I can't wait till we're back in the same room together. You know,
too, brother.
Yeah. Bottle of red, bottle of white. You know.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you for this, Jeff.
Okay,
truly,
man.
My
pleasure.
And my love to Joni. All right.
Absolutely. Thanks, Eric. Take care.
Take care.
Congratulations.
Thank you, man.
Say that yet.
Thank you. Yeah, we know it's going to be it'll be a boy. So
how many? Joan wants to know when she's due. I forgot to ask that on the chat.
November 18. Yeah. So a Scorpio boy.
Very cool. Wonderful. Really. And Laurence, how's she doing? Is she feeling okay?
Yeah. Yeah. She's doing okay. She's you know, there's they call it morning. Yeah, the second one now, but still the second trimester. She's basically, they call it morning sickness, but it's basically sickness except for the morning. So she's managing it. She's a trooper, you know, she's a warrior. But yeah, I think if she was able to tick off the boxes, she would definitely take off the nausea box. That I think that's not one of her. But yeah, but doing good.
Good, man. Great to see you.
Too,
Talk
man.
soon. Okay. Thanks for this. Okay. Bye.
Bye-bye.